Hey guys, forgive my deviation from my usual speech. I'm severely cognitively crippled right now. It's 4 in the morning, and I'm recording right now because I won't have any time to record for you guys tomorrow. So I'm sacrificing. I did about 3 hours worth of research. So make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, and hit that share button because it really does a lot. When people talk about black culture declining, they're obviously not talking about all black people. They're talking about the YN culture, right? So I want to talk about that particular decline, why the decline happened, but I also want to talk about some of the positives, some of the things that actually improved and increased after the civil rights movement. So if we're looking at the year 1964, only about 26% of black adults around the age of 25 and older had completed 4 years of high school. 26%, and by 2012 that number went from 26% to 85%. The percentage completing at least 4 years of college increased from 4% to 21%. Black college enrollment grew from 300,000 to 3 million in 2012. Civil rights legislation, desegregation, expanded university access, and affirmative action policies. I know affirmative action, DEI. But it did open the door for many black people to succeed, and not all black people abused that. A lot of them actually made their lives better, which is a good thing. Black poverty fell dramatically, believe it or not. In the mid-1960s, more than 40% of black Americans lived below the poverty line. That's almost half. And by 2022, that number fell to 17%. 17 is still a high number, if we're being completely honest, but 17 is a lot better than almost half. And, occupational opportunities expanded as well. Before the civil rights era, discrimination excluded black Americans from huge portions of corporate America. It excluded them from government universities. It excluded them from being skilled professors. And over subsequent decades, black Americans became increasingly represented amongst physicians, attorneys, professors, engineers, executives, elected officials, and other professional occupations post-civil rights. And a country that legally segregated black Americans within their own groups, that had a black president elected for 2 terms. So, that stands for something. Whether you agree with Obama's policies or not, he was black and he did become president, and that was a pivotal moment. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, it attacked discriminatory voting practices that prevented millions of black citizens from meaningfully participating in elections, and the number of black elected officials subsequently exploded. Black Americans, they became mayors, members of Congress, governors, judges, cabinet officials, and like I said, eventually the president. Political disagreements, they obviously started to arise because black Americans increasingly possessed the freedom to participate across the entire political system rather than just fighting for entry into it. You could now have a diversity of thought. So the black middle class expanded substantially. There was greater access to universities, government employment, professional occupations, and previously segregated housing markets allowed millions of black families to achieve standards of living that would have been extremely difficult for their grandparents to attain. And that created enormous upward mobility and helped produce generations of black homeowners, professionals, and entrepreneurs. Black life expectancy also improved substantially over the long term, although, today some serious health disparities remain, like staying up till 4 in the morning. Infant mortality was another thing that, the infant mortality declined. More access to medical technology, advancements in medicine in general, contributions from black people as well. You also had black entrepreneurship that expanded into industries and markets that segregation had previously restricted. Civil rights protections gave black entrepreneurs access to customers, financing opportunities, commercial property, and professional networks that had historically been much harder to reach. Today, black-owned businesses exist, even though I find myself quite often not supporting them just because of the members in some of those groups. And they can be a little intense and a bit overpricey, but that's just my anecdotal experience. But I will say there is a lot of positive black influence, with jazz, R&B, athletes, filmmakers. Jordan Peele is awesome. You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of positive representation. There's obviously certain aspects of black culture that I disagree with. But if we're looking at certain things like fashion, dance, entertainment, those things are obviously globally influential. I would say those specific metrics are positively influential. But, you also have the negative aspects, which I guess brings me into the decline. So manufacturing employment started to disappear. Cities that were attracting black workers during the Great Migration, they lost enormous numbers of factory jobs through, globalization, relocation, and broader economic restructuring. And manufacturing employment peaked around, 1979, before declining again. And these were precisely the kinds of jobs that allowed people without college degrees to support families and enter the middle class. And then you had the suburbanization. Is that a word? It changed the economic composition of black neighborhoods. Integration finally allowed financially successful black people to move into neighborhoods that previously were closed to them. And that was a progress in a certain sense, but it also meant that historically black neighborhoods lost portions of their middle class populations, professionals, homeowners, and black people that were doing good for themselves. They were just moving out and living amongst white people, basically. So then you had the bad blacks, if you want to put it like that, being left behind. The culture started to decline, unfortunately. The percentage of black families headed by married couples fell considerably after 1970. And another aspect of that is also the government, was required to make sure that there's no father in the household to become, eligible for government assistance and all that. You had declining employment, you had incarceration. Welfare is a big one, I would say. Welfare has its positives and negatives, I would say. But it does strip away your ability to pursue your own economic destiny. It's very limiting as well, and you have to find loopholes around the system. You can't report everything you make. It's very convoluted and kind of teaches you to live in a box. You can't really own that much. But yeah, it's a decline in that way. If we're looking at the homicides, between 1985 to 1990, the firearm homicide rate amongst black teens, it tripled. Young black men were disproportionately both the perpetrators and the victims of violence. And the government responded with aggressive policing, mandatory sentencing, rapidly expanding incarceration. State prison commitments for drug offenses increased from 10,000 in 1980 to 120,000 by 1990. So, removing large numbers of men from already disadvantaged communities, it created additional consequences and negative downstream effects. Residential segregation was another problem. The civil rights legislation made explicit housing discrimination illegal, but it didn't, undo redlining or exclusion from suburban housing markets, urban renewal, and things like that. In my conversation with Fanatic, he was talking about how a federal credit union it had lawsuits against it because even when black people had a significantly high credit score, they were still discriminated against. And there were obviously many issues. Black educational attainment, it was rising, but children in the poorest neighborhoods, they could attend these institutions, but also struggle with a concentrated disadvantage because of the external factors. I think two things can be true at once. You know what I mean? Black wealth, it remained far behind black income gains. A family can increase its income within one generation, but wealth usually accumulates across several generations through homes, investments, business, inheritance. And I know people a lot today that struggle to get a house because of racism. It's that recent. A lot of people talk about, slavery and complaining about slavery. I mean, like I said, I know people alive today that struggle to get houses, and I actually open my ears and listen to them because I'm a young guy and I don't want to come across as pompous or arrogant or privileged when, these people had it very, very rough. I talked about in another video the exposure to environmental pollutants. If you guys want to check that out, it's on my page. You can look into the neurological pernicious effects of like exposure to lead, mercury, and how that influences certain genetics, like the MAOA warrior gene. I go into that in that video, and I talk about how your environment influences your genetics, because a lot of people say, oh, black crime is just genetics, and then they try to bring up like some anecdote about like some hunter-gatherer tribe. But like when you go to the hunter-gatherer tribes, a lot of them, like the Hadza, for example, they're very peaceful, very, very peaceful people. If you're looking at the Maasai, they're very, very peaceful people. If you're looking at the Bushmen, they're very, very peaceful people. So it really depends on the tribe. It depends on, your history, your lineage, your genealogy. But it's like black people in America, they have every negative foundation for something that'll hinder success. Hip hop, it didn't create poverty or drugs and all that. It just really kind of makes it more commercially dominant. You have violent imagery, hypersexuality. You have this consumption of criminality and rebellion, and it sells. And these images are becoming increasingly visible, and they're becoming synonymous with black representation. So, I don't think commercialization created the problems, but it certainly amplified and normalized it on a broader national scale, global scale. I see some rap videos like Hot Nigga from Bobby Shmurda. I think it has like 1 billion views. There aren't 1 billion people in America. What is it, like 300 to 400,000 people in America or something like that? So it's a global spreading of a negative representation of people that have this face, have this hair, have this nose. And, it's a mixture of various things. Fatherlessness, negative cultural attitudes. There could be somebody that's smart in the hood and, they're around people that aren't good influences. So even if you do have a good one, it's just like everything around is just so crippled, and that decline can be reversed. There obviously has to be a massive effort from the country to reverse it. But yeah, I don't just blame one factor. Like I know some people might just blame white supremacy. Some people might just blame the environment. Some people might just blame this or just blame that. I think you can blame those things, but there also has to be some type of self-determinism. I think and I'm not saying that this, I'm not trying to sound cocky or arrogant, but I think if a majority of black people had my mindset, for example, I don't think a lot of these problems would be as prevalent, because I'm not an African immigrant. I'm a black American. My lineage has been in the Americas longer than most black Americans. So, the exposure to environmental pollutants and all that. But I don't want to be the poster boy for white supremacy that basically says, well, look at Twangola, he's doing good, why can't the rest of you? No one knows what I had to go through. As somebody who was born in the hood, somebody that maybe lived out of it for a little bit, but now I'm back in the hood again. I didn't just blossom or emerge. Yes, I'm bright and yes, I'm exceptional, but had I been around a different environment, I could have been much better than what I am. So just because I'm maybe an 8 out of 10 on smarts, it doesn't mean that if I had a better environment, I wouldn't have been a 9 or a 10 or something like that. So as good as I am, I think I'm just a regular guy, but as good as I am, it could have been massively better had I been brought up in a different environment around different types of people. And I'll say for the most part, by the time I got to maybe middle school, it was pretty mixed, I would say. But the prevailing cultural attitudes that I was used to and consuming were, the black American cultural attitudes. And it's about time for a shift, or people are going to realize that this culture is incompatible. black people are going to turn against black people. Other groups have no incentive to be around black people at a certain point. They have no incentive to like create exceptions and say, oh, well, we know Twangola is smart. Or, you know, oh, that guy, you know, maybe we shouldn't judge him, you know, because people don't want to end up like Irina Zarutska. People don't want to take the chance. They can acknowledge racism and all that, but still walk across the street because they know that, you know, their knowledge of the system and how well versed they are isn't going to protect them from a random stranger, a random thug, you know, that wants to do something to them. Maybe he's high on drugs or something like that. Maybe he has serious mental illness. You know, the knowledge in your head about all this, being woke and being a liberal, you know, you can make hours and hours worth of videos, but something still happened to you. So I think there are a lot of reasons why the decline happened, for all of those things that I listed. But I think overall, if I were to conclude things on a factual basis, it would be a mixture of, you know, the environmental pollutants, as well as just the unwillingness to change. Because I see a lot of light in a lot of black people, and that might sound weird to frame it like that, but I'll have conversations with dudes straight from the hood, and most of their conversations are very aggressive. They're very confrontational. They're very mistrusting or distrusting of other people. And then when they talk to me, it's like refreshing. It's like a breath of fresh air. They're like, oh wow, I can actually have an intelligent conversation with this brother. So I think what black people need is a leader, but I'm not somebody that's special. I work every single day, basically, paying rent like everybody else. I'm not like a rich leader, so I can't take that role myself. What I can do is I can provide a good standard, which is keeping things civil, keeping things respectful, being factually honest, doing your research, and telling the truth. That's all that I can offer people. You know, I'm not like this omnipotent, omnipresent force that was sent down to change the lives of black people. I would like to change the lives of all people. It just so happens to be that black people, you know, might need more help than others. And there are other groups too that could use help, like Native Americans. But I offer my hand to anybody that is willing to receive that help and that education. But at the end of the day, everybody has to look out not only for each other, but also themselves. But yeah, what did you guys think about the video? It's late, so if it was trash, I apologize.